A scar, a strike back, a lesson no one dared forget. 3 recruits cornered a woman in the mess hall, laughing, taunting, blocking every exit. One reached for her tray, another brushed her shoulder. The third made a crude joke and took a step too close. They thought she'd freeze, but what happened next lasted exactly 30 seconds. And when the noise died down, they were on the floor bruised, dazed, and staring up at her with one question. "What the hell are you?" Her answer shut them down cold and changed the way the entire base saw her forever. But before we show you what happened that night, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from and hit subscribe. Because this story goes quiet until it doesn't. Camp Ravenhall sits in the middle of nowhere. A joint training post for logistics and motor pool personnel. No cameras in the chow hall, no reporters, and definitely no one asking too many questions. That's where Rowan Drake walked each morning at 05:30, running the perimeter road before most soldiers open their eyes. By paperwork. She was nothing special civilian contractor. Basic clearance, assigned to assist with transport inventory. But that paperwork didn't catch the way she moved, the way she never sat with her back to the room. How her eyes clocked every exit. How she always walked one step off center when someone approached. There was a scar under her left ear. Her hands bore calluses that didn't come from typing. And, if anyone had noticed, they might have realized that no one had ever seen her flinch. Not once. Most people left her alone. But not everyone. Especially not Wolf Unit, a trio of fresh recruits who like to test boundaries and call it leadership. Blake Renshaw was the ringleader. All swagger. No experience, and way too confident in his smile. Colt Mercer followed him like a bad echo louder. Nestier, and always ready to stir the pot. And Troy Maddox Big. Quiet, and dangerous in the way a loaded gun left on the wrong table is dangerous. They'd started calling themselves Wolf Unit as a joke. But, like most jokes that get repeated too often, it started feeling real. Rowan first crossed their radar near the fuel lot. She was carrying a clipboard when Blake bumped into her shoulder hard enough to send forms flying. "Watch it," he muttered, not slowing. Rowan crouched calmly to pick up the papers. "My mistake," she said, even though they all knew it wasn't. Blake and Colt chuckled, walked on, but they both looked back, and that was all it took. From that moment on, Rowan Drake wasn't just the quiet contractor. She was a challenge. And Wolf Unit had never learned the difference between confidence and something trained not to lose. Rowan Drake's quiet retreat wasn't fear, but that's not how Wolf Unit saw it. To Blake Renshaw, her silence was a challenge. To Colt Mercer, it was disrespect. And to Troy Maddox, it was just another target to break. They weren't bad soldiers, not yet. But they moved through Camp Ravenhall like it owed them something. They swaggered, joked loud enough to be heard across the lot, and treated every interaction like an audience. They weren't building camaraderie. They were building reputation. And Rowan, she didn't clap. She didn't laugh. She didn't look. Gunnery Sergeant Brickley had been around long enough to see this movie before. And he knew how it ended. He'd been watching them since day 2. Not because of what they did, but because of how they looked at her. Not just curious, not just cocky, predatory, and blind to what they were circling. Brickley didn't know Rowan's file. He didn't need to. He could tell by the way she moved smooth, precise, unconscious calculation, how she placed her back to walls, how she tracked motion without turning her head, how she didn't blink at loud noises, didn't posture when challenged. He'd seen it before in places where silence kept you alive. The day after the incident at the radio shed, Brickley found Blake and Colt near the motor pool, talking just a little too loud for comfort. "Just saying," Colt shrugged. "Some people need to learn how this place works. You can't just ignore everyone and expect to fit in." Blake nodded, arms folded like he was about to deliver wisdom. "It's about respect. You give it, you get it. Basic social contract." Brickley walked up without hurry, his boots thudding across the asphalt. the kind of sound that made junior troops straighten reflexively. "You boys got something on your minds." Blake's posture stiffened fast. "No, gunnery sergeant, just discussing base integration protocols." "Base integration protocols?" Brickley raised an eyebrow. "That what you call harassing civilian contractors now?" Colt's face flushed. "We weren't harassing anyone, Sergeant, just being friendly." "Friendly?" Brickley nodded slowly. "And did the contractor in question appreciate that friendliness?" Blake shrugged. "Hard to tell. She's not much of a talker. Maybe she's got good reason for that." Brickley said. "Like what?" Brickley held them both in a long stare. "You ever hear the phrase, 'still waters run deep'?" Colt blinked. "Yeah. Means some folks don't talk because they've got nothing to say." "No," Brickley replied. "It means some people have seen too much, and they're smart enough to keep it to themselves." He let that land. "The trick is figuring out which kind you're dealing with before you do something stupid." Blake's jaw tightened. "You saying we're doing something stupid?" Sergeant Brickley didn't flinch. "I'm saying you're poking at someone you don't understand, and when you do that, it gets dangerous." "How dangerous?" Colt asked. Brickley turned and looked across the motor pool engines humming, tools clinking, sunlight bouncing off chrome. "Let me tell you something about dangerous people," he said finally. "They don't advertise. They don't talk tough. They don't look the part. They just are. And if you push them far enough, you find out why the smart ones stay quiet." Colt shifted on his feet. "You saying she's dangerous? I'm saying some folks walk quiet, because they've already walked through loud places. And the smart people, they respect that." Blake was silent. But Brickley saw the flicker pride grappling with logic. Ego resisting wisdom. A young man being told, "You're not the biggest wolf in the woods." "Understood, gunnery sergeant," Blake said. But Brickley had heard that tone before, the kind that understood the words, but rejected the message. "I hope so, son," Brickley muttered, "because some mistakes you don't get to make twice." He walked away, already knowing how this would end. Some kids only learn by touching the stove. He just hoped these boys could survive the burn. By 1900 hours, most of the chow hall had emptied out, just a few night shift personnel left, scattered, heads down, eating in silence, the kind of quiet that lets things happen, unnoticed. Rowan Drake moved like clockwork. Tray, silverware, the least worst of whatever remained under the heat lamps. She wasn't picky. Calories were fuel, not comfort. She took her usual seat, small table, corner near the window, back to the wall, eyes on the entrances. Old habits die hard, especially when you've survived the kind of missions that don't get logged. She was halfway through something the menu optimistically called beef stew, when the pressure in the room changed. Not loud, not obvious, just deliberate. 3 figures entered like they'd rehearsed it. Blake Renshaw, Colt Mercer, Troy Maddox, Wolf Unit. They didn't walk like soldiers. They walked like performers with a captive audience. They fanned out naturally, one near the drink station, one pacing behind her, one sliding into the seat across from hers. Casual, but precise. The exits were no longer hers. Of course. She noticed. She just didn't let it show. She took another bite, chewed, swallowed. "Evening," she said, without looking up. Blake grinned, leaning forward. Well, well, look who finally decided to eat with the rest of us." "She talks," Colt said, laughing nervously. "I was starting to think maybe she was mute. Just selective." Rowan replied. Troy's shadow grew over the table as he stepped closer. Selective about what he asked. Rowan didn't flinch. About who's worth talking to. The words weren't sharp. They were just true, and that made them sting. Colt whistled low. "That's kinda rude. Don't you think?" Rowan finally looked up, not intimidated, not angry, just measured, eyes dark, calm. "Still, is it?" Blake pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without invitation. Most people here try to be friendly. Community-minded, he said, gesturing vaguely at her tray, her posture, her silence. But you act like you're too good for everyone else. Rowan tilted her head. I don't act like anything. I just eat alone. Colt chuckled like that was some kind of punchline. Troy had now looped behind her, pretending to check the drinks. Her most direct exit blocked. She knew it, and they didn't know she knew it. Blake leaned in again. See? That's what I'm talking about. Choice. Like you're making a statement. Like the rest of us don't matter. Rowan's voice stayed level. The only statement I'm making is that I prefer quiet dinners. Maybe, Troy muttered. Arms folded. Voice colder now. You've been quiet long enough. There was weight behind the words. Not a threat, not yet, but something worse, certainty. Rowan set down her spoon, looked at Troy, then Colt, then Blake. Maybe you should find somewhere else to eat. We already ate, Blake replied. We came to talk. I'm not interested in conversation. That's the problem, he said, his grin hardening. You think you get to decide who talks to who around here, but that's not how it works. Colt moved closer, palms resting on the back of the chair beside her. We're just trying to be friendly. Get to know you. Find out what your deal is. My deal is that I want to finish my dinner. In peace. After. Troy said from behind her. We'll let you eat after we get some answers. What kind of answers? Rowan asked, her voice steady. Blake's smile never touched his eyes. Like who you are, what you're doing here, why you think you're better than the rest of us. I don't think I'm better than anyone. Then prove it, Colt said. The words hit the table like a dropped weapon. This wasn't small talk. This was control, dominance. Three men who mistook quiet strength for an open door. Rowan took a breath. Calm, still. How would you like me to prove that? She asked. Blake leaned back, voice casual. Take off your shirt. Silence. A live wire in the air. Excuse me. You heard me. Take it off. Show us you're not some ice queen who thinks she's untouchable. Rowan's eyes swept the room. Angles, distance, number of witnesses. Who would intervene? Who wouldn't? No, she said. No, Colt repeated. Like he'd never heard the word before. No, I'm not taking off anything. Not for you. Not for anyone. Blake's voice dropped lower. See, that's where you're wrong, because we're not asking anymore. Troy stepped forward. Colt blocked the main exit. Rowan's hands rested on the table, open, relaxed. Her breathing slowed, and when she finally spoke, her voice was so soft they had to lean in just to hear it. You really want to do this? You really want to do this? Rowan asked again, her voice low, calm, but edged like a blade. Blake Tanner leaned in, smug like he'd already won. We want to see what you're hiding under there. Curtis Red chuckled, stepping closer, fingers outstretched like he was entitled to the answer. That's when everything shifted. Rowan didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She didn't negotiate. For half a heartbeat. No one moved. Blake's hand hovered midair, caught between hesitation and arrogance, like he wasn't sure whether to poke a live wire or back away. He chose wrong. Rowan didn't give a speech, didn't issue a warning. She just reached for the hem of her shirt and, in one smooth, precise motion, pulled it off. The room snapped. The boys reacted like they'd won something, whooping, grinning, tossing elbows like they'd cracked some unspoken code. A few crude comments, a little too loud, a little too eager. But the laughter died quickly, because then they saw it. It wasn't the sports bra that silenced them. It was the single mark across her ribs, angled, old, and unmistakably earned. A surgical scar, pale and deliberate, that curved like a signature just beneath her left side. It wasn't grotesque, it was worse. It was clean, precise, like someone had opened her up and put her back together with military-grade intention. That one scar told a story none of them were ready to hear. It was the kind of scar a surgeon makes when they're saving a life, or when they're bringing someone back from something no one should have survived. She didn't explain it. She didn't have to. The room didn't feel like victory anymore, but Blake Tanner leaned in anyway, mistaking the silence for submission. "There we go," he grinned. "Was that so hard now the rest?" said Curtis, taking a bold step forward. "No," Rowan said. The word was flat, colder than before, steel, not ice. Riley Maddox moved behind her, reaching, laughing, almost. "Come on, you're already halfway there." His fingers brushed the back clasp of her sports bra, and that's when the switch flipped. Rowan didn't rise, she detonated. Her left elbow drove back so fast and so hard it sank into Riley Maddox's gut like a hammerhead. The sound wasn't a punch, it was impact. Meaty, final. Maddox wheezed and dropped before he even understood what hit him, before his knees hit the tile. Rowan was already moving, pivoting from the chair like a ghost breaking form. Curtis tried to rise, but her knee met his face before he could blink. His nose shattered with a sound that made nearby forks freeze in midair. Blake lunged, big, confident, sloppy. Rowan ducked inside his reach, caught his arm like a dance partner, and used his own momentum to spin him over her hip and into a metal table. Silverware scattered, steel legs collapsed, and Blake Tanner lay stunned beneath a tray of someone else's mashed potatoes. Decker Cole charged. A textbook haymaker aimed for her head. She dipped low, drove her shoulder into his midsection, and kept going. He went airborne, then down hard. The tile cracked louder than his breath. Zeke Monroe made the last mistake. He grabbed for her. Rowan twisted in his grip, broke it with a whip of her elbow, and uppercut him so fast he left the floor before landing next to a spilled bowl of stew. Silence. It wasn't a bar brawl. It was a surgical strike, and it lasted 24 seconds. Rowan stood at the center, her breathing steady but sharp, hair damp with sweat. That one scar still visible under the dim fluorescence like a line drawn across the body of someone who'd already died once and decided not to die again. No one moved. Not the 3 men groaning in pain. Not the mess hall staff. Not the night shift watching with eyes wide and jaws open. Rowan didn't gloat, didn't say a word. She just reached down, picked up her shirt, and put it back on calmly. Like none of it surprised her. Blake, bleeding and dazed, mumbled from the floor. What the hell are you?" She crouched down so they were eye level. Her voice was calm, no rage, just a quiet statement of fact. "I'm not a civilian contractor." She let the silence settle. Then continued. "I was attached to Naval Special Operations, not on the roster, never officially listed. But I trained with SEAL units before I disappeared into something blacker." Blake blinked through the blood, trying to process what he was hearing. 2 tours downrange, 16 hand-to-hand kills confirmed, though that number's probably outdated now. I was pulled from the field after an op went sideways. They're still deciding whether the injuries are permanent. She stood up, slowly pulling her shirt back on the fight. The scars. The truth all laid bare now. "I didn't want this. I changed my schedule. I stayed out of your way. But you saw quiet and thought it meant weak. That was your mistake." When the violence stopped. The chow hall looked like the aftermath of a bar fight in a war zone. Trays overturned, silverware scattered, chairs broken, and 3 recruits, the self-proclaimed Wolf Unit, were sprawled across the tile like discarded gear. Colt Mercer lay curled on his side, clutching his stomach, barely able to breathe. Blake Renshaw sat slumped against the wall, nose shattered, blood trailing down his face. Troy Maddox was face down near the drink station, motionless, but still breathing, and Rowan Drake stood in the center of it all, calm, steady, hands relaxed at her sides. She didn't put her shirt back on. She didn't apologize. She just turned toward Blake, whose head was barely upright. He mumbled through broken cartilage. What the hell are you? Rowan crouched beside him. Her voice didn't change. I'm not a contractor, she said. I'm Petty Officer First Class Rowan Drake, Special Operations. I wasn't on SEAL Team 6, but I trained with them. She let that settle. Then continued. 3 deployments, 41 engagements, 16 of them hand-to-hand. I'm not here for glory. I'm on medical leave while the Navy decides if my injuries are permanent enough to send me home for good. She stood. I avoided this. I changed my schedule. I left you alone. You thought silence meant soft. You thought restraint meant weakness. That was your mistake. Colt finally wheezed a few words. We didn't know. No, Rowan said. You didn't. Because you never bothered to find out. You made assumptions, and those assumptions almost got you killed. She looked around the room, the overturned tables, the stunned night shift personnel staring in silence. Then, in that same quiet precision, she showed throughout the fight. Rowan picked up her tray, returned it, stacked her silverware, wiped down her table, and walked out of the chow hall, leaving behind 3 broken men and 1 unforgettable message. Never mistake discipline for passivity, and never corner someone trained not to lose. By the time military police arrived, Rowan was gone. The mess hall was chaos. The 3 injured recruits gave inconsistent statements, each one edited to avoid admitting how they provoked her. Blake claimed they were just trying to integrate. Colt insisted it had been a conversation that escalated. Troy never spoke. The night shift personnel who'd seen it were more helpful, though even they couldn't explain what they'd witnessed. Just that 3 men had surrounded a quiet woman, and less than a minute later, she'd dismantled them like training dummies. According to the base duty roster, Rowan Drake had filed for emergency leave that same evening. Family situation, standard exit protocol, no trace. Master Sergeant Brickley wasn't surprised when he got the call. He'd seen it coming. What he hadn't expected was how cleanly she'd ended it. The report was sealed, the records redacted. The 3 recruits were transferred to separate units, their training files tagged with permanent disciplinary notes. Blake Renshaw received a medical discharge. He could no longer wear a protective mask properly. None of them ever spoke about what really happened, but word traveled, not the facts. The lesson that sometimes the quiet ones carry history like armor, and testing that armor can come with consequences no one's ready for. 3 months later, during orientation for a new batch of recruits, Master Sergeant Brickley added a new line to his briefing. Some folks walk quiet because they've got nothing to say. Others walk quiet because they've seen things most people can't imagine. The smart thing is to treat everyone with respect until they prove they don't deserve it. Then he paused. This story was once retold during a military leadership seminar and passed from green recruits to seasoned officers alike. On Stories Unseen. We preserve moments like these where strength whispers before it roars.